Welcome to In Confidence, where what we share in confidence helps us grow in confidence. Today's episode is near and dear to my heart because we're going to explore the triple standard that women face. If you've ever been labeled bossy, cold, or intimidating, this episode is for you. If you've ever been undermined because you're not outspoken enough, this episode is for you. We're going to dive deep into three things. First, what is the triple standard? Secondly, what can we do about it if we've ever been labeled bossy? And third, champion how we think about a different scorecard by which we measure success going forward. First, let's actually dive deep into the triple standard. One of my favorite quotes is from author Margarita Mayo. She says, "Women must be seen as warm in order to capitalize on their competence and be seen as confident and influential, whether they are warm or not. That's the standard we're up against." And that's pretty exhausting. I feel like it's the Barbie monologue that we love and everyone reposted, but all of us seem to face this at some point in our lives, whether it's in a personal or a professional setting. So this triple standard is quite difficult because if we only have 2 out of the 3, we get labeled. We could be competent and warm, but not confident. And all of a sudden we're labeled as not worthy of notice. Or if we're labeled as competent and confident, but not warm, we're labeled as bossy. For the first, there's actually a pretty specific example I want to talk about. Janet Yellen, when she was nominated to be the first woman head of the Federal Reserve, there were hundreds of articles that she did not have the gravitas to lead the Fed. And one of my favorite op-eds was written by Ezra Klein, who was at the Washington Post at the time. And he wrote, "I've had a surprising number of discussions that follow the same pattern. Yellen is great," my interlocutor will say, "but," the but is a variation on a theme, "she lacks toughness. She's short on gravitas, too soft-spoken or passive." He then goes on to see right through those naysayers, and he says, "What the complaints share is an implicit definition of leadership based on stereotypically male qualities. They aren't qualities that all men have or all women lack, but they're qualities that tend to be more rewarded in men than in women, and thus more prevalent amongst men than women." Yellen went on to be confirmed, but by the narrowest margin ever, and as the first woman to hold the position. And so I think the interesting question here is, how do we expand the scorecard by which we define success? Kelly Shue at Yale School of Management studied the same phenomenon. She looked at 30,000 employee records, and consistently she found that men were rated the highest on promotability, but the lowest on actual performance and results. Women, it was the reverse. They were getting the work done and doing it incredibly effectively, but were not promotable. And she said, when I double-clicked on promotion potential, it was charisma, extroversion, outspokenness. And she said 40% of the pay gap related to promotion, we can now say is because of subjective bias. And so this triple standard phenomenon, especially for those of us who are highly competent and warm and empathetic, but not necessarily labeled as quote unquote traditionally confident, i.e. extroverted or charismatic, it holds us back. And so I think there's a really important insight around that first type of phenomenon, which is for those of us in positions of power, how do we expand the scorecard by which we define success? And if the culture or the workplace or the even personal setting demands of us to be outspoken and assertive, how do we help women develop and culminate their journey in terms of being seen as leaders in a way that's authentic to them? And how do we teach them leading and performing superpowers in a way that helps them get further? We find that as women climb the ladder, they go from having 2 superpowers to 4 or more, and they tend to be qualities like leading or performing. But we do have to challenge this triple standard that we have in life. One of my favorite phrases is, when tsunamis happen, men make speeches, women clean up the beaches. And for too long, we've undervalued the quality of cleaning up those beaches. So I really think this is an and story in terms of this triple standard. We have to change the scorecard. We have to expand it, and we have to acknowledge other profiles of leadership that could be equally, if not more powerful. In fact, Kelly Shu says, management success is often more correlated with the qualities that women bring to the table. So it's ironic that we promote based on extroversion and charisma and not underlying skills and performance. The other thing I'll say about this is we do also have to create venues and opportunities to help women step out and step up in terms of these more charismatic skills and qualities. So I always say it's not an or story, it's an and story, because we want to win now, even while we set the stage for the future. Let's dive deep now into what if you've been labeled as bossy, i.e. you're competent and you're traditionally confident, but you're not seen as warm. And I think there's actually two pathways on this conversation. The first is, if you've been labeled bossy in an environment where there is systemic bias, I think we have to work to call out the triple standard. And what I mean by this is we have to actually advocate for changing the scorecard by which we define success in the workplace. There's a story when I was writing my book that I want to share with you. A woman shared a story about going into a meeting where she had to be very tough on a vendor. And she went into the meeting with a male peer, a colleague, someone that she had worked with for some time. They were true equals in this meeting. And she basically told the vendor that they were not meeting deadlines and they were off target. When they walked out of the meeting, the male colleague said, "Whoa, you were so intimidating." And she automatically said, "Oh my God, sorry. Oh, you know what? I had to get the work done. So yeah, I had to bring out my bossy self." And I stopped her when she was telling me the story and I said, "Why did you apologize?" And she said, "What do you mean?" I said, "You apologized for behavior that if he had done it, he would have been high-fived by a male peer." And she said, "Oh my gosh, you're right. What should I have said?" And I said, "Well, what you should have said is, okay, is that a compliment or is that a criticism? Because if that's a compliment, thank you very much. I got the work done. If it's a criticism, that's actually quite inappropriate. And by the way, you probably would have gotten high-fived if you had done the same." So I think we have to actually stand in our power, because we have to be able to name that the triple standard is happening to us in the moment, because we can't fix a problem until we've named it. And if we let people get away with it, then we're not actually changing the scorecard. In fact, male allies can be the most powerful people in helping us change these standards. I went back to this person a few months later and said, "Did you ever have that conversation with that male colleague?" And she said, "I haven't yet, but I should." And she said, "How should I give him feedback?" I said to her, "You know what? If it happens again, you should pull him aside and say, 'Hey, this has happened a few times where you've called me intimidating.' And that's actually pretty poor role modeling, because I'm doing the job, I'm getting the work done. And if I weren't a woman, then I think you probably would have admired or acknowledged it differently." So every one of us has to learn how to call out this specific triple standard, this bias, and find an appropriate way, because through feedback, we get stronger. Feedback is a gift. Now I want to go down the second pathway though, which is if you've been labeled bossy and maybe it came from not systemic bias, maybe there's actual real feedback for you in that moment. We found that one of the things that happens for people who have what I would call the leading superpower in high degree. So of our 8 superpowers that we've defined around confidence, there is one called leading, and it's all about taking charge, commanding, being out in front, stepping up, setting direction. One of the things that happens is this leading superpower in action, while so powerful, in fact, people who have the leading superpower are 2 to 3 times more capable in every situation. So it is a really great superpower if you want to climb the ladder. We find though that with every superpower, there is a shadow side. It's sort of like with great power comes great responsibility, but also downsides. And I've been labeled as having this superpower in too high a degree. The shadow side of having this superpower is you can be labeled as cold, unfeeling, and overly demanding. And the way to correct for this, if you think you're getting bossy feedback not because there is a bias or a triple standard in place, the way you balance this is by introducing, giving, believing, some of the qualities that have a degree of warmth to them. I'm not saying we should buy into this triple standard. What I am saying is we are able to create followership when we balance the strong suits in terms of being in charge and being in command, along with the more people-oriented qualities of emotional intelligence. Over and over in my career, I have gotten this feedback about being too bossy, too demanding. I do believe some of it was because of bias. On the other hand, I have thought about, do I ask people to a standard without creating personal connection? And so if you've been labeled bossy and you've gone ahead and eliminated the portion that might be related to bias, how do you then address creating connection and emotional connection with the people who work with you to inspire followership? I do think followership is a really powerful element to being a great leader. And here are some ways I think we can think about that emotional side of the equation. First, it's about how do we think about empathy through passionate curiosity. Now, if you've listened to episode 1 of our podcast, I go through the idea of passionately curious questions. And in the leading superpower, there's a built-in ability to bring out the best in others. And empathy is a powerful component of that. I think that's where we can actually start to sit inside someone else's story and create a connection. We can ask people, hey, what drives them? Or what part of this project is meaningful to you? Before we go into the deliverables and the things I'm asking you to do, I want to create a personal connection for you to the work. Or we can check in with people more often. I have found that the people that I have been most intimidated by, when they've said, hey, we should get a cup of coffee and just chat about what you want to do with your career, all of a sudden they became human to me. And I started to practice that with others because I know we stand on the shoulders of so many. Even a simple, how are you doing? No, how are you doing really? Starts to open a gateway to connection. The second thing is personal touches. One of my favorite leadership stories is from Doug Conant, who used to be the CEO of Campbell's Soup. He wrote more than 30,000 handwritten notes to people he wanted to thank, and they were personal notes. Folks would have them up in their cubicles so that when he walked by, he would see that his handwritten note had made a difference. It's not just a nice gesture, it's actually practicing human connection. And in the story that he tells when he was being driven home, and I know that most of us don't get town car drivers, but he would have like a little notepad where he would write out a few thank you notes during his drive home. And the last idea is, how do we lead with vision and not just direction, not just commanding our orders? Because people don't want marching orders, they want meaning. And so instead of just giving out the instructions, we invite our team into the why. We let them have their fingerprints on our work. We give them the space to collaborate and contribute. It's not softening your message, it's strengthening your leadership. Those are some thoughts that I have around this triple standard that women face. And in particular, I think there's a greater call to action around expanding the metric by which we define success, finding ways in which we can connect with people in case we have been labeled intimidating or bossy. I will say, even sometimes when I've told people a struggle I'm having, all of a sudden they'll connect with me differently and feel like I'm a human being too. Because that's really what it is. When we've been labeled bossy, we've been attached to almost a cold and unfeeling standard, and we want to create human connection so that bossy is not a label that we use in any environment. So if someone calls you bossy, I want you to take a breath and remember, you're not bossy, you're leading. And your leadership, your gravitas, can include clarity and empathy. You're not the problem, the label is. And the more we talk about it, the more we normalize strength in all its forms. I hope you enjoyed this episode of In Confidence. I hope you're leaving this space stronger than when you entered it. If you love this episode, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And always subscribe so you never miss a moment of inspiration. Until next time, in the words of my 9-year-old self, I see you, I value you, and I believe in you. This is In Confidence.